Well, the generative AI boom has been a big story for the markets this year. The technological breakthrough is disrupting industries from technology to finance. And a new KPMG report out today found AI is revolutionizing deal-making processes, with more than half of companies currently using generative AI for M&A deals. Here with more on its impact on the private markets, we've got Troy Pospisil, who is the founder and CEO of Ontra. Troy, great to have you here with us. You think about the disruption that is set to come forth and really touted around some of the productivity that can be unlocked by engaging or leveraging AI within workforces. What does that disruption, though, look like, particularly as it flows through to different areas of the broader economy?
Yeah, well, Sean and Brad, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. So generative AI is incredibly powerful in enterprise workflows. We're seeing the ability to automate and enhance really cumbersome, time-consuming workflows that previously took countless hours from office workers. And in particular, in private markets, there has been compounding complexity for private funds asset managers. So at Ontra, we build AI-powered software that automates and enhances every aspect of the private markets deal flow. So that includes everything from sourcing and executing investments to raising and managing funds. And within the private markets in particular, there's been compounding complexity that's been driven by the growth of the industry. You've talked about how much dry powder there is. Surprisingly, 2023 was actually a record fundraising year for private equity. That has driven a huge increase in competition, the number of firms that are in the marketplace, the size and breadth of these firms. They've had to dig deeper to find investment opportunities. So they've moved globally into new regions. They've moved into various asset classes that they weren't in before, like private debt and infrastructure. And of course, in any area of the financial markets, when you see growth, regulation inevitably follows. And we've seen continued increase in regulation of the private markets. And so for private equity firms and private funds asset managers in particular, there's been a massive increase in the amount of administrative work that was essentially impossible to achieve with their current workforces. And so AI has arrived really just in time to help them automate a lot of these cumbersome administrative workflows so they can actually stay on top of and execute all of the work they need to do to manage their firms and execute on the work they need to do so they can get back to focusing on investing and working with their portfolio companies to add value.
So Troy, I think a lot of people are asking themselves when they see this type of technology, the fact that it is disrupting the deal-making process already and what that looks like going forward, is what the impact is going to be on workers. When you talk about automating a lot of these jobs, when you talk about automating certain tasks, some people could be left in the dust or could be unfortunately cut. Do you see that, or is that simply not the case, given the fact that some of these firms are just struggling to keep up with the number of deals and the number of activity that they want to see take place at their companies?
So what we're seeing is it's a productivity enhancer, not a replacement of creative, intelligent workers. Historically, we were seeing that private equity professionals, particularly folks in functions like finance and legal, were spending 80% or more of their time on relatively repetitive, non-creative activities that didn't necessarily align with creating value for their firms, with sourcing investments, with increasing the value of their portfolio companies. And they were only able to spend roughly 20% of their time on really strategic, value generative work. And so what AI allows them to do is really automate a lot of that more repetitive work so that they can reallocate their time to focusing on the work that is really impactful and moves the needle for their firms. So it just makes them faster and more competitive. And given the increase in the competitive dynamics in the industry in general, that's a need for these firms if they're going to stay ahead of the competition and really drive market-beating returns.
So Troy, what do you think this is then going to tell us about the activity that we could see this year? Yes, there already are expectations for a pickup in activity given the assistance that we could see from generative AI. Could we see maybe a bit of more of activity than we had initially been anticipating?
Absolutely. There's obviously the macro tailwinds that we see in the private markets. You're seeing a stabilization of interest rates. You're seeing life in the debt markets that we hadn't seen in 2023. There's a record amount of fundraising. There's a record amount of dry powder. So you have all the macro ingredients for a really big year of private equity M&A in 2024. And AI is enabling our customers and the industry in general to just move way faster, to review more transaction opportunities, to move faster as they're reviewing transactions, to move faster through the legal paperwork as they're doing transactions and managing portfolio companies. So it is absolutely an accelerant that could enable a huge uptick in activity from private markets investors.
Troy, it was a massive hype phase into a show me story year for generative AI, and some of the private companies saw their valuations balloon. Are valuations getting too ahead of their skis in the generative AI kind of private sector right now?
Look, I think whenever you have a new technology, you see investors, venture investors in particular, get really excited. Ultimately, in any area of technology, the survival rate of technology companies is not incredibly high. You have a lot of seed stage and Series A companies that ultimately don't make it and become much larger companies. I don't think there's anything unique about generative AI. People get excited, they bid up valuations, and we've seen that here. Ultimately, what will matter is, are companies creating value for their customers? It's not about just showing up with technology and saying, look at this technology. It's about showing up to the customer's door and saying, here's the tangible value that I can create for you. And I think as generative AI gets more mature and people spend more time with it, entrepreneurs and customers alike, we're going to find a lot of really valuable industry-specific use cases, which is what we're doing at Ontra for the private equity industry.
All right, well, if all of these co-pilots that some of the tech companies have been talking about come to life in 2024, then we're going to be spending a lot of time with generative AI for sure. Troy Pospisil, who is the Ontra founder and CEO. Troy, thanks for taking the time here today.
Yeah, Brad, Shauna, thanks for having me.